Hello, everyone. It is. I still struggle with this. It is an enormous, enormous pleasure to be asked to come and speak to you all. And we're all busy people. I enormously appreciate you giving up an hour of your evening to come and hear me speak. Quite why people do it is beyond me, but here we are. I gather, obviously, that this is on behalf of the Graduate Entry Medicine Society and getting people, especially people who would not necessarily either have access to medical school or think about going to medical school. That's one of my favorite things to do, and we'll come into that a little bit more and as to why that is. So the title of my talk today is Medical School: The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I'm going to briefly take you through my experience so far and all the things that have happened during that time. And it was only today when I was looking through the photos to put in this presentation, quite how much I realized has actually happened. Some of it good, some of it bad, and some of it ugly. So who am I, just for the purposes of this? Ollie, obviously, 24-year-old male. This is something that I've only started putting in my talks more recently, but I have to be very acutely aware that everything is coming through my own lens and my own experiences as from the point of view of obviously a cisgender heterosexual white male with he him pronouns, because actually since coming to medical school I've realized that this combination of things and people's own cultural, societal factors enormously affect their experience, and crucially a proud northerner as well. And I'm in my final year at Warwick Medical School, which is one of only two exclusively graduate entry programs in the UK, as far as I know, or the other being at Swansea. I don't think that the Scottish one, Scott Gem, has any exclusively graduate entry schools yet, but I'm a final year medical student at Warwick. So taking you all kind of back to the beginning, where it all went wrong. So I've been interested in doing medicine, as I'm sure many of you have, since being a teenager. And I was going through school and I was pretty smart until I wasn't. I routinely was one of those people in my rural primary school, my sixth form, would have been, quite comfortably either top of every class or towards the top of every class. Solid straight A stars at GCSE. Everything was going kind of, I guess, on track with someone who wants to do medicine or someone that people might expect to do medicine. I was pretty firmly on that track, and I realized this is going to make me sound incredibly arrogant and conceited and all the rest of it. And I'm not trying to show off. I'm just trying to give you the context of what things were like academically for me at that time. Then A-levels happened, and this is the place where often many of those people who are academically quite high achieving and crucially never really had to try in order to perform well, this is where they come unstuck, and I certainly came unstuck. So as was a relatively normal thing to do, I took biology, chemistry, physics, maths, and further maths at A level. And again, this was kind of what the people in my situation would have traditionally done. And I get through my first year of exams and I get B, C, D, D, U. So imagine, going from straight A stars on kind of everything, or top marks, to this. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that for some people, they'd be thrilled with BC DDU, and that's not to make light of that at all. Again, this is just frame the context for what I wanted to do and the pathway I wanted to take. This obviously isn't going to be good enough. And I think my teachers were all, I don't think they were disappointed in me as such, but they were definitely disappointed for me, because clearly something had gone wrong. And I did a lot of sort of reflection and self-introspection and so on. And what I decided to do after a lot of conversation with my tutors, because they all knew that I wanted to do medicine, and I think the assumption was going to be that that's what I would do, I dropped my maths subjects because they were my weakest ones, and I retook my biology, my chemistry, my physics alongside the A2 year. So this was back when A2s, or you had A levels, your ASs and your A2s. Obviously, a lot of this has changed since then. But the idea was that in my A2 year, when I took my exams, I would retake my AS level, my first year of A levels as well, and I come out with 3 A's and a B after these retakes. And there is a slight caveat to that. One of those A's was in general studies, because we all had to take it at my school. So I had A's in biology and physics and a B in chemistry. So what do I do now? This isn't going to be enough for most places. Certainly then, and certainly now, you're expected to have your 3 A's at A level at a minimum to go and study medicine. And I wasn't distraught, because I'd come a hell of a long way, relatively speaking, in terms of my grades. But I was thinking, what am I going to do now? I still want to be a doctor, but I can't be a doctor with these grades. So I rung around all the medical schools and said, would you consider taking me with my what was effectively 2 A's and a B, because medical schools don't pay any notice of general studies. And all of them said no. Either we're already full, or we're overbooked, or we simply won't take you with these grades. We understand that you've had some troubles clearly, and you've had to resit, and we respect that, but we can't give you a place. So what I opted to do was, when I spoke to the admissions tutor at Newcastle University, they told me that they had a place on their cellular and molecular biology program. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Like, this isn't medicine. It's not even biomedical sciences, but it sounds similar enough. And I really enjoy, certainly, the biology side of the sciences. That was my favorite, and what I thought then was going to be the most relevant to medicine. So I did that, and this was a 3-year Bachelor's of Sciences with honours, a standard one that was also industry focused, because I was acutely aware that that I might need to actually get a job. If medicine didn't work out for whatever reason, I would want something that I'd be able to take to industry, and this was an industry focused degree. I was told during this conversation that if I did this degree, it would make me more likely to be given preference to interview for medicine. I was told that the medical school at Newcastle would look kindly on me being a Newcastle graduate. This, by the way, was completely untrue, and I'm not sure why this conversation was even had. But anyway, I went and did my first degree. So probably in the same position that many of you watching now were in. And I spent a huge amount of time not doing my degree. I enjoyed my degree very much, but something that I've realized about myself is that I like to be busy all the time. And that means doing things that are often not related to what I'm supposed to be doing. So what did I do? During this time, I got involved with the Nightline service, which is a student-run, essentially a version of Samaritans, a mental health phone line. I, for a couple of years, worked for the student newspaper and eventually became the deputy editor there at the Courier. Some of the best times of my life so far, short though it may be, were spent doing that. I was a peer mentor during that time. Again, I'm sure you guys have systems where you look after younger students on the program, and for my faculty, science, agriculture and engineering, which doesn't exist anymore, sadly, at Newcastle, I won that award. And I competed in the iGEM competition. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but that's an international research competition where that was my first real foray into the world of independent research. But all the while I was thinking about medicine. I still want to be a doctor, I think. So this was in the back of my mind all the way through. So I graduated. Look at how much youth and hope there is still left in my face. There, Ollie of, when would this have been? 2017, had no idea what was coming. So this was during that competition, the iGEM. This was taken at a hotel in Boston, kind of based out of MIT and Harvard. This conference there. So this was my first international oral presentation that I ever gave. One of the highlights of that time. This was, I can't even remember which newspaper that photo was taken for, but that is a vial of gold particles that I'm holding there, gold nanoparticles worth about £700. And New Scientist did a write-up on this work that we were doing, and I don't know whether you can see my name on the slide there under the photo credit, but we were making electronically responsive gene promoters. I'm not going to go into that too much, but my point is, this is the first time that I'd ever been involved with like a large-scale research project, and I really enjoyed it, a lab-based project. So in the summer of second year, I did this iGEM competition. I took my UCAT and my BMAT because I wanted to apply to Oxford, and they required the BMAT. For graduate entrance, you can do another exam called the GAMSAT, but having heard many horror stories about that, I, in that moment, didn't really want to take it. I took the BMAT immediately after a transatlantic flight, so I flew overnight, relatively speaking. Got back to the airport at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and at 9 o'clock that morning I was sitting the BMAT in a primary school, secondary school even, near where I was living in Newcastle, and that was a terrible idea. That went about as well as you might imagine. During this summer I also did a week's worth of work experience in psychiatry, which again was not a medical specialty that I've ever had any particular interest in, and continue not to have. I think it's immensely important, but it's just not where my passions lie. But that was really good work experience. I learned a lot about what being a doctor is like and what it's not like. And I made my application to medical school. So this is now the summer of 2016, or what would have been October 2016. So for my graduate entry medicine programs, I applied to Warwick, Oxford, University of London and Newcastle, all for graduate entry courses, because if any of you are thinking about it, something that you should know is that student loans for your tuition are only available for 4-year or 5-year accelerated graduate entry medicine programs. What that means is that if you already have a degree, like I was obviously going to, and like many of you will, if you want to apply for an undergraduate standard 5-year A100 program, then you have to pay the full tuition fees yourself at 9,000 whatever it is pounds a year. And just for me, that wasn't going to be an option. I'd heard of people like their parents having to take out mortgages on the house and things like that, and horrific private loans, and that just isn't something that I wanted to go through, particularly not the first time that I was applying. So I applied for all 4-year programs, knowing that the entry competition was going to be a lot higher. It's around 9.5 to 1 for places on a 5-year program, as in 9 and a bit applicants per place. For graduate entry medicine, that can be as high as 25 applicants per place. So the competition is substantially tougher, but I didn't really have an awful lot of choice, or didn't feel like I did. So do my application, send all that off, and February of 2017 comes around, and some interesting things happened. The first is that because of this international genetic engineering competition, the iGEM, off the back of that, I received an offer from my supervisor on that project to study a fully funded doctoral training partnership PhD in viral genomics. So that would have been a genetic engineering project, fully sponsored. I think the wage was something like £26,000 a year, which is pretty good for a graduate salary fresh out of uni. And that was also going to commence immediately after a bachelor's degree, which I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but a master's degree is absolutely not a requirement to get onto a PhD. All you need to get onto a PhD is to convince the person who runs it that you're a good candidate. And I'd had an interview before Christmas just because my supervisor, I didn't realize it was a PhD interview at the time, but my supervisor said, you should go talk to this guy and he's got a project that you might be interested in anyway. So I get this email saying, we want to offer you this 4-year PhD. And I was thinking, wow, but I want to be a doctor. This is tough. But I also had to decide within 4 days whether or not I wanted this PhD. And I hadn't heard anything back from medical school. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I said yes to the PhD. My supervisor was very understanding. He said, Ollie, you've told me before that you want to do medicine ultimately. So what we'll do is statistically, you won't get into medical school this year. Let's just, put that out on the table. The odds are very much against you because they're against everyone. The odds are so slim. If you don't get in this year, we'll accept you onto the PhD and you can apply one more time to medical school. And if you get it the second time, then we'll release you from the PhD with a master's degree. We'll give you a master's by research for the first year of work, which is an incredible agreement, by the way, to have. That's unusual, but it's one of the things in my life that I'm most grateful for, someone sticking their neck out for me. So I accept that. And a week later, I get my offer for medical school. So as you can imagine, my supervisor was not, he wasn't immensely happy as far as the PhD was concerned, but he was happy for me because he knew I wanted to go to medical school. So I accepted my offer for medical school. I pulled out of the PhD, and September of 2017, I started medical school. So I was on that first step, towards being a doctor. So one thing I will say is that medical school is unlike any other thing I've ever studied, ever, because the curriculum is so broad. You're required to know an enormous amount of knowledge in a lot of breadth, but not very much depth. If you've done biomedical sciences or natural sciences in any sense, you will know more depth about your thing than as a medical professional I would ever hope to know. My molecular biology degree went into things in far more depth than medical school does, but as a clinician, you don't need the depth unless you're doing the research. Something else that happened is that 40% of my cohort failed the first year exams at medical school. It's an incredibly intense year where you're doing basically 2 years worth of preclinical medicine in about 9 or 10 months. Do not underestimate quite how intense it is, even if you have a science background. Thankfully, I wasn't in that 40%, but what I'm trying to impress upon you is that people who are far smarter than me, like I'm very average as far as medical students go, maybe even worse than average, but some very smart people failed those exams. And around those first year exams, a couple of months before, this was my first ever experience with mental health services, because I began to develop some very strange compulsive behaviors, just what were clearly down to exam stress. But this is something I'll talk a bit more about in a little while. But this is the end of my first week in medical school, our first day in hospital. So you can see we've got our badges and our lanyards on, all looking very proud. During medical school, I've also discovered a love for teaching. It's obviously the stuff that I do with my YouTube channel and things is all based around outreach, but I discovered that I really enjoyed anatomy, which is something that not enormous numbers of people love. And I also really enjoyed teaching. So I got involved in a lot of teaching for the younger years. At Warwick, I don't know how it is at other medical schools, but the expectation is that because the course is so intense, you are expected to teach. You will rely on older medical students to teach you in order to get through the exams at every stage. And as such, you are also expected to teach. And this is all extracurricular as well. So every evening at the medical school, some students will be doing teaching. And I really recommend making the most of peer-led teaching. You'll also meet your heroes. So I don't know if anyone in the chat knows who this is, but it was reading this person's book that essentially convinced me finally to go to medical school and had an enormous influence on me. But this is Mr. Henry Marsh of Do No Harm fame, who I met at a conference at King's College. Many of you might recognize Adam Kay from This Is Going to Hurt. That was another bestseller, who I've actually been in touch with quite a lot since coming to medical school. Really nice guy, and very unhelpfully, I think the third image has rendered behind this one for some reason. But Kevin Fong, who wrote a book called Extremes, and he was one of the anaesthetists that works in support of astronauts and is an expert in space medicine. So you meet some really cool people. I've also been doing YouTube, obviously through all of this time. I think Aaron was saying to me before that you've got Atuza and Kenji, both good friends of mine, coming to speak in the next few weeks. What I would say about this is that don't underestimate the power of networking and collaborating and reaching out to people, because they will, not only are they good professional contacts to have and can put you in touch with the right people, but they will also become your really good friends as well. And I'm trying to think, me, Atuza's just over the a short train ride away in Birmingham. Kenji, as well at King's. Karma Medic, I've met Ali Abdal the odd time, Mo, that medic, all of these kind of the Instagram Tash the medic, all of these people, met them all really lovely. So don't underestimate the power of networking. I've also discovered a real interest in surgery, as I said before. So I think this is us using these very cool stapling devices on some lung tissue. So what these things do is they grab hold of a piece of tissue like that, and then they cut. There's a motorized scissor. This was at some surgical skills course that I was at. Don't underestimate, again, the power of upskilling during your courses. And I also was lucky enough to become co-president of Warwick Surgical Society. Getting involved with medical societies is really good for your career generally. So again, the photo is unfortunately backwards, but this was me going for a meeting at the Royal College of Surgeons in London to go and give a talk about what we'd been doing and catching up with the other medical school surgical society presidents, again, who some of them have just become very good personal friends. And here, this is the most recent thing to happen during the peak of COVID-19, the first peak, I should say. Now, we were all redeployed. The more advanced medical students further on in the course. I was in my third year when this happened. I'm now in my final year. We were redeployed as healthcare assistants, and I was in the very unusual position of being closer to an F1 doctor than I was as a healthcare assistant, because I was deployed on a unit that had no inpatients. I was working in emergency cardiology, and because ours was a short stay unit, so people would only come onto our ward for 4 hours or less at a time. You don't really need healthcare assistants to provide personal care. They don't need washing, toileting, or it's rare that they do. It tends to be more short stay. So what I was doing was a lot more bloods, ECGs, clerking in new patients, taking the histories, doing initial examinations, and then handing them over to the registrars, the more senior doctors, who ultimately would take over their care. But the registrars are very busy, so we had to try and streamline that process. So just a quick summary of medical school and the kind of important things that have happened for me. So I said the Surgical Society, founded a clinical skills society because I'm a big believer in good clinical examination skills, and we didn't have one, so we wanted to teach the younger students. I've started a widening participation scheme, which has now been running for 3 years, and we had to raise a couple of grand in the first year from private donors to run that scheme, but now it's funded by the medical school. So what we were doing was taking disadvantaged students from the local area and giving them a free interview prep course to help get them into med school. And as I say, that's been a really successful, thankfully, piece of work. We presented it at conferences. The Medical Schools Council has taken notice of it, and it's now funded by the medical school. It was seen to be such a good thing to do. I've done a lot of ambassador work with some anatomy software developers, Complete Anatomy, 4D Interactive. I've done a lot of outreach work for them because, again, they're just looking for people who have sort of large social platforms. I've done a lot of academic research as well. I 2 nights ago submitted what will be, fingers crossed, my 3rd publication in an international journal. So presented at a few international conferences, worked as part of the Brain Book Neurosurgical Collaborative, which is doing patient information, videos, tutorials and artwork and things for neurosurgery patients. And as that may have given away, I am in myself an aspiring neurosurgeon, and that's what I'm trying to do with my career. So what's next? In a week, I will be starting to apply for my jobs as a Foundation 1 doctor. Isn't that terrifying? Which I would start, fingers crossed, next August. I want to take some time out before I begin specialty training. I would like to do a year in a dedicated neurosurgery job after my foundation training as a fellow, just to check that that is definitely what I want to do and get some more experience. I want to go, despite this now being my 7th year of university education, there is still a lot more that I want to learn. I want to do a master's, probably a PhD, but the PhD might wait until specialty training. And that hopefully is just on time to finish this presentation. So there's my website, which has a contact form on it, and my email address if anyone wants to get in touch. I'm usually pretty responsive, and I'd be very, very happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that, Ollie.